Fort Macon in 1923 was placed on this list of surplus military properties that the Army was getting rid of. In Congress, the state of North Carolina's representatives and senators mounted a campaign where rather than selling off Fort Macon, the fort would be given to the state of North Carolina for use as a public park, and the campaign was successful. In 1924, by congressional act, Fort Macon then was given to the state of North Carolina officially as a public park, and that is how Fort Macon became Fort Macon State Park. My name is Paul Branch. I'm a park ranger at Fort Macon State Park. I am a park ranger who's been here for 37 years. I'm the historian of the fort, among other things. We have museum exhibits explaining all aspects of the fort's history, from the construction on up to World War II. Research on the fort, various exhibits, programs, and things that we do here at the park. Pretty much, many of them have been generated by myself. Some of the rooms are set up as soldier rooms. We have an enlisted men's quarters. We have the commandant's quarters. We have a restored kitchen. We have a restored commissary area. We have a restored bakery, restored gunpowder magazine. We've restored different aspects of the fort's existence and its rooms to show people what the fort was like and what was going on. In other words, it's not just an empty building. Things were going on. People lived in these rooms. How do they live? What were they doing? That's what we're trying to interpret here. North Carolina was just embarking upon a system of trying to build state parks. They had one other park, which was Mount Mitchell State Park, that had come to pass in 1916. So in 1924, just a few years later, Fort Macon State Park becomes our second state park of the North Carolina State Park system. They didn't have any money to really do anything with Fort Macon State Park after they had acquired it. So the state of North Carolina just had to pretty much let it sit for a few years. The Great Depression came along, and in 1934, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was a federal workforce, was brought to Fort Macon, and that was the means by which Fort Macon State Park became an actual functioning state park. They cleared the old vines and debris and bushes and mess that had grown up in the fort, cleared it out. They created public facilities, a picnic area, public restrooms. They built a house for a caretaker. In other words, the work of the Civilian Conservation Corps actually added a functioning park. They had facilities, and officially, after their work was completed in 1935, the following year, 1936, on May 1st, Fort Macon State Park officially opened as North Carolina's first functioning state park, functioning with facilities for the public, a road coming to it, the whole bit. And so we were the first functioning state park of the North Carolina system. We have two basic interpretive themes here. We have a natural history, barrier island ecology will be one of our themes. Our other theme, of course, revolves around Fort Macon itself, which is the cultural history theme. Fort Macon is a structure that was built starting in 1826 and was a structure used for the defense of the United States. It was part of a chain of 38 forts that were built by the United States after the War of 1812. And these forts extended from Maine to Louisiana and even to the West Coast. And so Fort Macon is one of a chain of many. So this fort was here to guard Beaufort Harbor, North Carolina, which today is Beaufort and Morehead City. The fort took 8 years to build, 1826, completed 1834. Cost of construction almost $500,000. And one of our favorite questions, somebody always asks this: how many bricks? 9,233,412 bricks. The construction records are that precise. One of the most important things we've been able to do here in the last few years is restore some of the fort's armament. We have a number of cannons on the walls of the fort, and some of these are original pieces. We have several that are original, including we have two of the fort's actual cannons that are still in existence. There are two 10-inch siege mortars we have that were actually in the fort. Those are the only surviving weapons we actually have of the fort's original armament. Recently, we were able to acquire an example of the largest cannon Fort Macon had, a 10-inch Columbiad. This is a huge cannon, an original piece made in 1863. We were able to acquire. This cannon is from the same foundry as one that we had here in the 1860s, so we have put it back in the same place that the original cannon stood, and I guess you would say that since this one is original too, it was the brother of the one that we used to have. We've restored a full battery of guns that would have been on the eastern side of Fort Macon back in the 1860s, the same types at the same locations, the same models, and most of those guns are functional. We have our reenactors on our cannon days to fire these different cannons, and we have an array that we will shoot. One of the most popular ones is we fire our 10-inch siege mortar with a cannonball, quote, quote. We will actually fire a projectile out of one of these cannons, the 10-inch siege mortar. We're one of the few places that actually fires a live projectile out of an old Civil War period cannon. The cannonball is a basketball taped up and painted the appropriate black to make it look like a cannonball, and we will have just enough powder to fire the cannonball over the wall of Fort Macon. We have an impact area, which of course we'll go retrieve the ball and bring it back in. Yeah, but that is one of the most popular things we have, to be able to fire one of these things with a projectile and actually see how it works. To be in the fort when somebody loads and fires one of these things is, the public just loves it. And here again, we're bringing Fort Macon alive. You'll hear these things fire. It's very loud, very impressive, a lot of fire, a lot of smoke. And then stop and think a moment, what was it like during the battle here? There were 54 cannons in Fort Macon at one point. There was a battle here that lasted for 11 hours. You hear one of these cannons fire, it's deafening, and you think, what in the world would it have been like to be a soldier here, to have a battle with all these guns going off for 11 hours? It must have been just unbelievable. So, and that's one of the things we love, bringing history home to the public. In addition to Cannon Day, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, we have a midweek program called the Evening Gun Program. At sunset, it was typical in a fort like Fort Macon and any other military post that you would prepare for the night. You would post your guards for the night. The doors of the fort would be closed, the flag would be pulled down, and then one of the fort's cannons would be fired in salute of closing the fort and pulling the flag down. And since this was done at evening, obviously this is the Evening Gun Program. And this is a tradition that goes back to medieval times, even to the days of castles and so forth. So we don't wait for actual sunset because the park would be closing, and of course our visitors would have to leave. So we just explain what the evening gun was about, how it was carried out here at Fort Macon, and then we go through the process of actually firing one of the fort's cannons. And that's what our Coast Guard cannon crew volunteers do. Next to Fort Macon is U.S. Coast Guard Base. These Coast Guard folks are kind enough to volunteer their time to come over and assist the park with this program, because otherwise we wouldn't have a gun crew in midweek. They will train under the same manuals, soldier manuals, that soldiers did back in the 1860s. In other words, there are manuals where you learn how to fire a cannon, and these guys study the same manuals. and they do the same actions, everything on firing a cannon back in the 1860s, and of course today too, is all very carefully choreographed by the cannon crew. Each person has his duties on the cannon crew to carry out the loading and firing process. And our Coast Guard men and women will learn these same duties to fire an 1860s style Civil War period cannon. Fire! We are helped out in so many ways by the organization, the Friends of Fort Macon. Friends of Fort Macon has been in existence since about 1976. It has grown into a major organization, and they are able to provide us many things, from being able to purchase artifacts for the Fort's Museum to helping out with programs. They have provided a lot of the funding to help us with our creating our nature trail. They have provided funding for some of the cannons that we have, to build an interpretive gazebo that we have outside the fort. Without them, none of these things would just be something we just would not have. They are a blessing to the park, and they have been able to provide so many things that we might not otherwise have been able to get through normal state budgets and so forth. So that's where public assistance in the form of donations comes in from individuals and families and from our local businesses. So when our visitors come to Fort Macon, there are numerous things that are awaiting them. Our beaches are very nice, so we have fishing, we have just getting out and walking, we have looking for shells. Essentially from Memorial Day to Labor Day. We offer a protected swimming area, lifeguard protected swimming area. Our bathhouse is open with full range of bathhouse facilities and the concession stands. Our bathhouse area is our recreation center, if you will, and our folks come to see the beaches, to throw out a fishing line, and to swim and cool off in the height of the summer. And we have our lifeguards there to protect you in the protected swimming area. So that's one of our most important aspects to the operation of Fort Macon State Park. We have various programs and everything we'll give. Sometimes we have kind of not a touch it tank, but we may bring some critters in that our children can look at and touch, see a crab and up close and so forth. We sometimes have shell programs where we have an array of different shells that you might find out there on the beach, and that's always popular. At other times, we have occasionally we'll be able to do a fishing program, maybe even a seining program. So anyone interested in this, I suggest you contact our websites and see when these activities are offered. Our new nature trail, I say new, it's several years old now, but it's one of our most important features that we've added here recently. We have just over a 3 mile, about a 3.1 mile nature trail starting. You can start either at the bathhouse area and go, or at the fort area and go. But the trail goes from the fort area all the way on the soundward side of the park highway down to the bathhouse area, then comes back on the ocean side through the dunes and ends up back at the fort area. And it's about a 3.1 mile trail. There are some bridges over some of our marshy areas, and you'll be going up sand dunes and getting a good view and then following along. But that's one of our most important features that we've added here lately. Now down at the fort, we have other programs that we offer. We have, in the natural aspect, we have bird hikes and things like that. We will have occasionally an astronomy program, a nighttime program. But in the fort itself, that's our most popular set of programs that the public comes for. Daily we have guided tours of the fort. Beginning from Memorial Day through Labor Day, we have all the weekends musket firing demonstrations a couple of times on Saturday and then again on Sunday. where one of the park rangers will show you how soldiers loaded and fired the muskets, the weapons that were used back in the war between the states era. We have several times a year living history programs where we have a reenacting group come and just do programs detailing what it was like to be a soldier in the fort back in the 1860s. And they do both Union and Confederate. When you read about history like that, it's one thing you're reading it out of a book, but when you see living history, reenactors actually living these things, you can walk up and touch the wool uniforms and see how uncomfortable they must have been. You can see them, how they loaded and fired their weapons and so forth. They do women's programs where you can see the types of things that women and family civilians wore as well as the soldiers. It brings history alive, and that's one of the things we seek to do at Fort Macon. Again, not taking it from just an empty brick building to what was it like to be there back in history. We encourage our visitors to come and be a part of all of this.